Bob is, of course, the former Conservative MP and military expert. He's author of Total War, about new forms of warfare in the 21st century. And Jim Jatras is a former US diplomat, foreign policy advisor for the Republican leadership in the US Senate. Both of you are very welcome to the programme this evening. And I just have that caveat that I may need to cut you off very, very quickly and apologise for that. Jim, maybe I could start with you. There's so much that is at stake here in terms of what this summit is about. I just wonder what your thoughts are on what is potentially achievable in the next 24, 48 hours.
I think the short answer, Peter, is not much, at least not on Ukraine. I think they could maybe make some progress on arms control agreements, or maybe direct contacts between the United States and Russia, direct flights, maybe some economic issues around the Arctic or the Bering Strait. But on Ukraine itself, Trump is going to go there, and at least what he said lately, we'll see what he says in his next press conference, but he says he wants to demand a ceasefire, and almost certainly Putin will not agree to that. And if that is the case, that puts the ball back in Trump's court. Does he go down the road of more sanctions, which are unlikely to achieve any effect, or does he try to walk away from the whole thing and dump the whole steaming pile on the lap of the Europeans and pretend it's not our problem anymore?
Speaking of the Europeans, Bob Seeley, there have been, of course, many efforts. We saw Zelensky in Downing Street today, this coalition of the willing, the call that took place yesterday with Starmer as well. What role do you think they play in this, or is it simply down to two men, Bob?
Well, I think it's very secondary. I mean, I think what Jim says is depressing, but actually pretty on the money, I'm afraid to say. It's always nice to hope and to say, let's hope we can, because hundreds of thousands of Russians and Ukrainians have died. This war is going to continue to kill lots of people if it continues. The problem is with this that there is a fundamental issue here, which is Putin doesn't want an independent Ukraine to exist. And he's pretty much dedicated the last few years, arguably the war started back in 2005, or the conflict started back in 2005, and he's dedicating pretty much his remaining years to destroy Ukraine, to recreate Russia as a virulently anti-Western nation and society, and indeed, if he will get the chance, to break NATO. So there is an argument to suggest that he will try to string Trump along, that he will offer some kind of negotiating pathway in order to find ways of manipulating and dividing the United States and the European Union, as he does indeed with some European leaders. Do I think he's going to turn up and say, this has been a dreadful mistake, I'm really sorry and I want to stop the war? No, I don't think so.
I wonder, Bob, what you think in terms of, well, I suppose what Trump might say now to pave the way. We know he's going to speak to us in the next few minutes. What is the challenge ahead for him?
Look, the challenge ahead for him is not to look like he's being played by Putin. Yeah. And I think he has reacted against some of that so far this year, because I think Putin has strung him along in a way which is sort of borderline arrogant and disrespectful, and I do think that Trump has personally offended him, and I think if I was Putin, I would probably try to reel Trump in and play him a little bit more intelligently. I mean, there's an argument to say that Putin won't do that, and he will just sort of effectively say the West is our enemy. It'll play well in Russia in the short term. It gives him less to manipulate and to try to find divisions between the Westerners. And Putin is a man who will try to use non-military tactics to deliver the victories that his soldiers can't deliver in the field. So he will try to play Trump, and the issue is for Trump: is he going to take what's Trump's idea of success? And I'm not quite sure. Is it the start of negotiations, however empty they may be? Is he about to walk away? He could say, look, I've tried, and hand it back to the Europeans, or just basically say, well, he keep on supporting Ukraine, and let's see if Russia in the next year or so runs out of men and machinery. 2 years ago, all the experts said Russia couldn't run on the amount of casualties it has and the amount of equipment losses. It's managed to do both. How much longer? Could it last another year or two? Potentially.
Jim, I wonder whether you think Trump can be an honest broker here, especially given how previously, certainly the Biden administration was incredibly pro-Ukraine. Trump has had arguments, including in the Oval Office, with Zelensky. They seem to be on a more even keel now. Certainly there are worries that Putin is manipulating him. There are historical allegations in regard to the New York property market, for example. That's been in various books and things. I just wonder what you think Trump can realistically achieve here.
Yeah, I think that's a fundamental flaw in the way Trump has approached this. He cannot be an honest broker. He wants to pretend this is a fight between Ukraine and Russia, which, as even Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, has admitted, this is a proxy war between the United States and NATO and Russia, and Ukraine is the venue. Ukraine is a tool in that proxy war. It is the proxy. So no, he can't go in there and knock Zelensky's and Putin's head together and say, you boys play nice. That's not going to happen. I think Bob's right, though. I think Putin is trying to jerk him around. I mean, let's face it. He's not the only one doing that. I mean, look at Mark Rutte calling him daddy. And I mean, everybody wants to flatter him, knowing that he's got a big ego. He wants to be a winner. He wants to have a Nobel Prize. You tell him what he wants to hear and try to string him along. Putin's not the only one doing that. In fact, I think that's the reason Putin agreed to this summit in the first place. I do disagree with Bob about what's happening militarily. We've seen a very dramatic crash in the Ukrainian lines near Pokrovsk. I think the Ukrainian army is in trouble. Trump knows that. Putin knows that. The Ukrainians know that, and the Europeans know that. And I think time is not on the West side in this.
So if there is a pressure from the time in terms of timing here, will that put will that put Trump and potentially Zelensky into a tight spot, Bob, do you think?
I'm not so sure. And with regards to what Jim says, yeah, there has been some moderately bad news from some positions around Pokrovsk, but the Russians are still taking vast casualties, and we're talking about over 1,000 a day and thousands a month. So even at this rate, it would take years for them to conquer a sizable chunk of Ukraine. The idea that the Ukrainian front lines are suddenly going to collapse, I don't buy, simply because of the amount of drones that they've now got coming online, but also because the Ukrainians are beginning to use land drones and modestly at the moment, but it'll be more next year, replace human beings with land drones. They can't do that entirely, but they can do that somewhat. So the idea that we're going to have a military collapse and a military victory for Russia, at the very best, from the Russian perspective, they might have taken most of Donbass by the end of next year. That is a very, very long time, and there will be another 100,000-300,000 casualties before that happens. So I'm dubious about how bad things are for the Ukrainians, although there's a permanent struggle in electronic warfare, in the sort of missile defense over Ukrainian cities, in the daily drone battle on the front line. So there's lots of fluidity in the war, but the Russians are still moving very slowly, although they are moving forward in places.
Just finally, Jim, when we look at Trump's language around this, when he talked specifically in regard to exchanges of land and so on, do you think that was just him talking off the top of his head, or do you think that's a realistic prospect, Jim, in terms of what will be discussed?
I'm sure the topic will come up. I'm not sure how realistic it is. The Russians have been very clear in their demands since June of last year that the Ukrainians must pull back from the constitutional limits of the 4 oblasts. The 2, Lugansk and Donetsk, are largely under the control. Kherson and Zaporozhye are not. I don't see the Ukrainians agreeing to that. I suppose in exchange, the Russians could pull back from the areas they hold in other oblasts. But again, I think the bigger problem is this. If there is a ceasefire based on any kind of agreement on territory, which of course the Ukrainians will not agree to, that means that so-called coalition of willing forces, British, French, Germans, will go into Ukraine. And the Russians, again, would have to be insane to agree to a ceasefire that would allow that to happen, because then they will find themselves fighting all of NATO, not just the Ukrainians. And I don't think they want that. Frankly, I don't think anybody should want that.
Gentlemen, thank you both very much. That's Dr. Bob Seely, former Conservative MP, military expert, author of Total War About New Forms of Warfare in the 21st Century. And we also heard from Jim Jatras, who is a former U.S. diplomat and foreign policy advisor for the Republican leadership in the U.S. Senate.